now, and then as long as we have that, they're not going to destroy us. Yeah, Anna Mae and other people were assigned to work with me with the American Indian movement in Los Angeles. If Anna Mae was an informant, I wouldn't be here, and I could name 20 other people that wouldn't be here if she was an informant. There's no way she could have been, as far as I'm concerned.
I have to speak on my personal knowledge and feelings. I knew Annie Mae too well, and she had been involved too much in our group, and I know that she was not an informant. Because if she had been an informant for the FBI, she would have been more valuable to the FBI. The last time they took her into custody alive, she would have been more valuable to them then as an informant, because she could have been a witness for them in the courtrooms to tell stories against people.
The FBI, on the same day as the second autopsy, issued a press release stating that the FBI denies Aquash was an informant. Therefore, immediately trying to turn the finger around, instead of pointing at the FBI as being responsible for her death, pointing towards her friends and associates.
Was Annie Mae Aquash an informant?
I couldn't comment on that.
Doug Durham was an FBI informant. He infiltrated the American Indian movement. He became close with our leaders. He always wanted to use force and violence when he worked with us in the West Coast office. When the Senate subcommittee investigated revolutionary activities in the U.S., Doug Durham was the only witness allowed to testify about the American Indian movement. No real members were allowed to speak. The committee concluded that the American Indian movement was a revolutionary organization.
Does the FBI use paid informants in connection with the American Indian movement?
I couldn't comment on that.
Anyway, she said that she had a dream, and I don't know, she always wanted to know how the spirit world was, you know, after death. And in her dream, she dreamt that, I guess, grandfather, Tukashila, was going to take her into the spirit world. And she felt like she was leaving her body. But she said she looked back and she'd seen all her people here on Earth yet. And she knew she had to come back because she had more work to do here for her people. So she asked them if they could just let her have a little more time. And she said she felt herself coming back. But she knows she said it was such a beautiful feeling. There's nothing like you never felt before. So she knows that, you know, after you die, she said it's, you know, it's the beautiful world you go to. And she always talked about how she always wanted, after death, she'd want to be an eagle or some kind of bird, because she always wanted to be free, you know, go where she wanted to, anytime she wanted. And
she told me that Agent Price told her that if she didn't cooperate with the FBI, she was not going to live out the year. And she didn't.
You know, I don't know who the individuals were that carried out the act of killing her. And I believe that the way the FBI operates, that they did it in such, that it's possible that they did it in such a way that someone other than an FBI agent put the bullet in her head. But I know that that was their plan, because she told me that David Price told her he would see her dead. She told me this, and it worked out that she is dead.
Well, the FBI called me, and they told me that identification came from Washington. That's what they said, yeah. That it was Annie Mae Aquash, that she had died of exposure. And that's all they said. Then there was nothing. No, I'm sorry or anything like that. No, just a blunt thing.
In this instance with Anna Mae Aquash, I think it's very important to note that the FBI was the one that took the initiative to try and identify the person, the unknown person, who was found on the reservation. The FBI felt it very, very important that the identity of that person be established in the interests of propriety, the interests of legality, the interests of solving what could have just resulted in someone being buried and never having their identity established. And you have to recognize the needs of a family of a person who would then live on for years and years and never know whether their daughter or sister or wife, mother, might still walk through the door someday, because you never know what happened to them. So the FBI did take the initiative, and it was through our initiatives that the body that was found on the reservation was identified as Anna Mae Aquash.
They could have made their identification by dental charts. It's the most logical way. You know, it's usually done that way, all right, when they can't make identification. But they said they had to cut her hands off to send them to Washington, D.C. to make this identification. But I understand the nature of war. In the act of war, it is known, it's very common that the enemies mutilate the bodies of the dead.
The only way a fingerprint today can be identified is to manually compare it with somebody else's fingerprint. That is, there must be a list of persons whose fingerprint this probably is. Somebody had to originate a list that the FBI office in Washington was asked to compare it with. And in all probability, they were told, compare this with Anna Mae Aquash. We have other direct evidence that indicates that that's in fact what happened. That is to say, the hands were sent along with a note saying it's probably Anna Mae Aquash.
The fingerprints were, the fingertips were severed from the hands in order to do certain sophisticated tests so that the identity of the person could be established. Someone who is living, the obtaining of fingerprints is very easy. Depending upon the length of time that a body has had an opportunity to decompose, it becomes, the longer that period is, the more difficult it becomes to establish the identity through fingerprints.
This is the dead room in the latent fingerprint section of the FBI, and in this particular room we handle the fingers of deceased individuals which have been submitted to us from law enforcement agencies throughout the country. If it's possible to work with the hands without cutting the fingers, severing the fingers, then we do that. But in some cases we have to cut the fingers off and work with them on an individual basis. Our primary function is to obtain impressions from each of the fingers that we have. If we receive them today, if we're able to obtain prints, then we would send the hands back to the contributor tomorrow. We have no further need for them. The contributor might have an urgency for getting them back with the other parts of the body so that it can be buried.
It was a mutilation of her body after she had been killed as a physical act of war. That's what it was. Because her hands had been sent to Washington, D.C., and yet when her hands were sent back after the identification had been made, Bill Wood, the man, he had her hands in a package, and he just casually tossed them to Bruce Ellison, our lawyer, and said, "Here, you want Annie Mae's hands?" And he just threw the box. And I understand an act of arrogance and an act of racism when it takes place.
The FBI said that they didn't have anyone present at the first autopsy. Norman Zagrossi said that who was the assistant special agent in charge of the Rapid City office, and indeed all FBI agents in South Dakota, said that there was no FBI agent present because they didn't know who she was, even though she was a fugitive at that time, and they had no reason to suspect foul play, so why would there be an FBI agent present? So the question is, why indeed?
Well, there was always the thought that there may have been some foul play, or there may have been some other reason for her death. And it was felt very important that to establish whether there was any foul play or not, that the body should be exhumed and re-examined.
Well, Anna Mae's body was found on the 24th of February, and She was identified on March 6th, supposedly after her family was contacted. Well, her family immediately contacted the Wounded Knee Defense Committee in Rapid City and requested that we somehow obtain a second autopsy. They, along with other people who knew Anna Mae, couldn't believe that she had died of exposure, as the FBI was claiming. She lived outside. She grew up outside. She was not going to die of exposure, particularly when the weather here was relatively mild at that time. I went to the FBI office the following Monday, I think it was the 8th, and told the FBI that we were going to have a second autopsy, we were going to have the body exhumed, have an autopsy conducted, and we were going to conduct a full investigation to find out who killed Anna Mae Aquash, and so that these matters would be brought to light. The FBI immediately went to the U.S. Attorney's Office and had them request an exhumation of the body, got a court order to that effect from Judge Bogue, and an autopsy was scheduled for the 10th of March. I went to the FBI and informed them that we wanted to have our own pathologist present and secured Dr. Gary Peterson.
The FBI initiated the proceedings on March 3rd of 1976. A federal district judge in Rapid City issued the order on March 9th for the body to be exhumed, and an autopsy was performed on March 11th of 1976.
When Anna Mae Aquash's body was discovered by rancher Roger Amiot, not only was she wrapped in a blanket, but that she had various jewelry on her, wristlets and rings on her fingers. And these were items that Anna Mae always wore. In fact, she kind of was known by always wearing a lot of rings, and particularly these bracelets. During the autopsy, second autopsy, I asked Agent Price for these objects so that they could be buried with her. And he's denied, in fact, that any such objects existed. Dr. Peterson spent less than 2 or 3 minutes examining Anna Mae before he came out and said that she had been shot by someone placing a small caliber pistol to the back of her head and pulling the trigger in execution style. And was amazed that Dr. Brown could have missed such a point.
There was an entrance wound at the back of the head, to the right side of the midline in this area behind my head. And the entrance area was clearly an entrance wound. The area where the bullet had lodged had not broken the skin, so there was just an area of discoloration and an area of firmness under the skin at that point, but there was nothing really to indicate that it was a gunshot wound. But the entrance wound was clearly an entrance wound.
There were also people in the hospital who approached us and said that when Anna Mae was brought in, people there felt that she had been shot, because when her body was being moved, blood started coming out of the back of her head, coming out of a hole in the back of her head. How Dr. Brown missed this is another question.
I guess I'd rather not comment in terms of absolute terms like complete and thorough, but I think the case speaks for itself to a certain extent, and would say that it was not all that difficult to find the bullet.
The Anna Mae Aquash case is within our jurisdiction in that it was a crime on a government reservation, to wit, murder. And it is still a pending investigation, and we are attempting to solve it as a murder case and develop the facts so that those who did the killing can be brought to justice.
The whole thing to me is foolish anyway, to start off with, you know. Like, the investigations are done by the FBI, you know, and they're the ones involved, you know. What can I say, you know? You're investigating yourselves, you know.
The probability is that Price and Wood and other members of the FBI did not want an investigation that would lead directly into the arms of people with whom they were working on a regular basis to suppress the American Indian movement politically.
The people from this area wanted to bury her in a traditional way, and they wanted her body intact. I asked William Wood, while the autopsy was being conducted, if he had brought down her hands, and he said, "Sure, I'll go get them." And this is Agent Wood. And Agent Wood went outside, probably to his car, and came back with a box and walked up to me and with a big smile on his face said, here are her hands. Take them.
She don't want to be beaten by white people, by white men. She'd rather be free, free in spirit and free in heart for her nation. That's why they found her dead. And that's why the FBI cut her hands off and sent them to Washington, D.C. for fingerprints. And that's why they buried her remains at a Catholic cemetery in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation with no name on the grave. When they told her family it was Annie Mae, they said, well, she died of exposure. She had froze to death, but no. Independent pathologists found she was shot in the head. Shot in the back of the head, right here. Close range. They found her in a blanket. Half her face was bashed in. She had no teeth. That's the kind of attitude Annie Mae didn't want her children to live. She didn't want her children to grow up and face that attitude.
Hey,